Okay, hi everyone. I'm Debbie Aquino, and today we're going to talk about layers a little bit. This is more of a basic class. I want to go over just some of the basics of the panel, and also in something that goes along with that are file formats. I wanted to start us off in Lightroom because I think most of you are editing in Lightroom and then going into Photoshop. But Lightroom and Photoshop and Bridge and Zoom would not play well together earlier today. So we have no Lightroom right now. So what I did was I opened up a raw file in Lightroom or in Photoshop. And what I want to point out to you is when you look over here at the file format, and can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen? And can you see the little cursor? I'm going to take that.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So this is an ARW. So obviously it is a Sony RAW file. The thing you want to understand about RAW files is they always open in Photoshop as a flat file. Now, what I mean by a flat file is you have a single layer. It is called a background layer. It has a lock on it, and that's it. There's only one file, or only one layer in this file. Now, anytime I make an edit to this image right now, it does two things. First of all, it is a global edit, meaning it affects everything in the image. The second thing is, once I save it, it becomes an uneditable file because I worked on the background layer. And the only way for us to be able to edit this later would be to have your edits or your changes or your additions on separate layers. So we've made our edits, or we're going to make some edits to this. Here's something else you need to understand. If once we go to File, Save, and I'm going to just do Command S, File, Save. Now, if you are in Photoshop, you've come from Lightroom and you're going into Photoshop, it's not going to prompt you. It's going to save your image as a PSD file. Because I didn't do that, because I went around Lightroom, it's giving me an offer to another file format. The thing about a PSD file is it's a lot more versatile. And let me explain about the three file formats as photographers we deal with. So the first of all is our RAW files. They are basically a digital negative. Each RAW file is proprietary to the camera manufacturer. So ARW is Sony, NEF is Nikon. I don't know what Canon is, but you all know. And understand that those can only be opened. They cannot be saved. That's why they're a digital negative. So when we save our files, we have to save our files for other reasons. If you're going to use a layered file, you're going to make a lot of edits, then you need to choose a file format that will allow you to save layers. Those two are Photoshop documents, a PSD, or a TIFF, a tagged image file format document. And they're very similar, but they're also very different. When you save it as a PSD, it is proprietary. That file format is a native file and proprietary to Adobe Photoshop. What that basically means is you cannot open a PSD in Topaz, in On1, in Luminar, in Nik. I'm not sure about Capture One. I was able to open up a PSD, I think, in GIMP once, and it did some funky things to it. So PSD is basically a Photoshop, just for Photoshop. Now, the advantage of it is it will hold multiple layers. You can have alpha channels. You can hold smart objects. You can add all kinds of things to it. You can add text and you can keep it as live text. It is the largest file size. It will it will be by far the largest file size. It supports transparency if you need that. For most photographers, we don't need transparency. It's more for the graphic designers and web designers. You can use a Photoshop document to print to your personal printing device. I don't recommend that, and I'm sure there's a bunch of you out there who are much more qualified at what file format to use for printing to your devices. I don't use it because it takes forever when I try to print a Photoshop document. And generally, we use a Photoshop document just so you can save all your original layers, all your original files. If you have text, that text will be editable as going into the future. And Tiff formats do a lot of the same things. They will hold multiple layers, channels, smart objects. A TIFF file can also be compressed with lossless compression. It does not support transparency, and generally it's just used for commercial printing. Graphic designers use it a lot for to use another image editing software. The biggest thing about TIFF files is that they can be opened in Topaz. They can be opened in On1. If you're using other plugins and you want to use them independently of Photoshop, TIFF files can be opened there. But as photographers, we either want to post our images or send our images to the photo lab. So you're going to want to save in a JPEG format. Now, the thing about JPEGs is they are flat files. The process of turning a file into a JPEG flattens all the layers and you have one layer only. Also, JPEG is a lossy file. Every time you save this file, every time you make changes and save the file, it will randomly throw out pixels. And I've seen degradation in as few as 8 to 10 saves. So while you can control it somewhat, just be aware of it. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm saying be aware of it. A JPEG file does not support transparency. You will always have a background. If you want to take a picture of a gift and you get rid of everything around that present, get rid of the stuff around the bow, and everything's white, when you print that JPEG file, the background's going to be white. It's just a byproduct of the file format. However, it's the one we're going to send for commercial printing. We're going to use it on the web. We're going to put it on Facebook. It's also the one we're going to send to the lab. So I will give you some guidance as we go through the exercises, but these are just things to keep in mind when you're using layered files. They're very fun, but they get very big very fast. Okay. So I'm going to start off with this image of the cat, and this is a JPEG file. So because it's a JPEG file, it's a flat file. If I go over here to my layers panel, it is one layer only. It is named background. It has a lock on it, and it's a flat file. Before I go too much farther, I want to talk about the layers panel itself. Now, first of all, because we only have one layer, a lot of the features are grayed out, especially all these up here, some of these down here. So to make these light up, I need to add another layer. So I'm going to select my background layer, and oh, we need to do this first. All of you are going to love me for this next feature if you are not using it yet. Over here in your layers panel are these teeny tiny little bitty lines. We refer to them as a hamburger menu. And when you click on the hamburger menu, you get a contextual menu that has tons of more menu options for the layers panel. The one you want to go down to is called panel options. When you bring up the panel options, and this is impressive when it happens. Okay, over here on your layers panel, see how tiny that little thumbnail is? And when you start adding layer masks and start adding other layers, these things seem to get smaller and smaller. So we want to change the thumbnail size to the largest one available and go ahead and say okay. And boom, look at that. That's awesome. Now we can it really is helpful once you start getting little icons that get placed in this thumbnail. It's really helpful to have a bigger thumbnail icon there. So now when we click on the background layer, you can either go up to the hamburger menu and you can say duplicate layer, or The keyboard shortcut command is hold down your command or your control key and press the letter J, and it will duplicate the layer. When you go to the Photoshop conferences, they call it jumping the layer. So Command J. And as soon as we created that additional layer, all these things are no longer grayed out. They all lit up, almost all of them. So this first row up here where it says kind, this is called a filtering row, and we're not going to go over that today. The second one is a blending row, and we're going to go over a little bit of that. This first one where it says normal, this is a drop-down menu, and these are blending modes for the layer that you have selected, and it blends with the layer below it. This is going to be a whole nother exercise or a whole nother webinar, and very fun, very fun. In addition to blending the layer, you can control the opacity of the layer. This is a slider. You can slide back and forth. We're not seeing any change because our layers are identical right now. You can also highlight this and dial it in if you want, if you're a dial-in person. You can also use the scrubby sliders. As I mouse over the word opacity, I get a finger with arrows, and when I slide it back and forth, you can see that my opacity moves. And these scrubby sliders work on a lot of things in Photoshop. This is a locking menu, and we're going to skip that for today because it is very fun as well. Now, down here on the bottom, this is where a lot of the magic happens in your layers panel. So I'm going to create yet another layer. So one thing about Photoshop is you have to tell it what layer you want to access. I'm going to click on layer 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and do Command or Control J again to duplicate the layers. Now I have layer 1 and layer 1 copy. And if I want to select two of these layers at the same time, I hold down my Shift key and then I click on the second layer that I want to select. When I do that, this little link icon lights up right here. And when I click on it, it links these two layers together. So if I need to move these two layers, they will always move together. I can link them together without merging them together, and that can be really helpful sometimes. So to unlink them, I just select them both, go back, and click the link, and they go away. Now, I just want to select one layer for right now. This little icon is called an FX, but in the real world, we call it a layer styles. You can apply specific styles to shapes and to type that exist on a layer, and these are many of the layer styles. We might do one or two of these today, but this is, again, another webinar in the making. This is your masking icon, layer mask icon. If you click on it, it adds a layer mask just to that layer. When you click on these icons, you'll notice there's a little double line around it, and you'll notice that your properties panel looks very much like the Select and Mask panel or Select and Mask plugin. And you can add a mask just to this layer. I'll talk about that in a second. If you click on the original thumbnail icon, it goes, the properties panel changes and tells you, has some things in there you can do, like remove background, select subject. If you have two layers selected, you can do align and distribute. So you get different features based on what you have selected in the layer. So here, this with the mask, we are looking at the mask. Here we are looking at the thumbnail of the image. The next icon on the bottom is the adjustment layer icon. We're going to play with these first. These are the same, all these icons that live down here on this icon will add that image adjustment as a layer instead of how it would look up here and under message and adjustments. In fact, the only two items that are not in that menu are shadow, highlights, and HDR toning. Those can't be applied as an adjustment layer yet. The next one over is a grouping folder. So if I select these two layers, hold down my Shift key, select the two layers, I can group them into a group. And again, a group moves just similar to linking. You can move a group together, or sometimes it's just easier to put it in a group because if you have several layers, it can get confusing from time to time. The next icon over is the Add an Empty Layer icon. Click on it and it adds an empty layer. You can draw in this layer, you can put a graphic in this layer, you can do a lot of things with this layer. And if you want to delete this, you just click on the trash can and whatever layer is selected, it will delete that entire layer. Now, if you have a group like this, here we have a layer that has a layer mask on it. It depends on what I have selected on what it will delete if I press the trash icon. If I have my layer mask selected and I press the trash icon, it deletes the layer mask. But if I have the layer selected, it will delete the layer. If I have a group selected and I press the trash can, I get this. Do you want just the group or do you want the group and the contents? So this can be a good way to ungroup something if you need to. I'm going to say group and contents to get us back to the beginning. So I covered a lot. Any questions so far? One thing I want to point out here is over here, we have a history panel. I've been playing with this image a lot today, just to make sure I got everything right. And I have a really long history panel. Remember that Photoshop now has 999 undos. However, I believe the default is 50 undos. So you can go back up to 50 steps with your history panel, because sometimes we know I made a mistake a few steps back. If I could just go back 3 steps, well, you can by using your history panel. I'm not going to right now, but you can see I deleted the group, deleted the layer, applied a layer mask. This can be very helpful when you're trying to figure out where you went wrong, or if you're deciding to go with a different direction, this can be helpful. Okay, so back to this image. So we have a JPEG image, and right now it is a flat file. And if I go up to image and I choose adjustments and I choose levels, I'm going to get my levels adjustment panel. And just in case, I don't know how many people are familiar with the levels, the histogram here, so bear with me. So here we have a histogram. This is exactly like the histogram on your camera. When we're looking at this histogram, this little slider on the right are your whites or your highlights. The slider in the center are your midtones, and the slider on the left are your blacks or your shadows. And if you adjust your shadows, your midtones will move with you. If you adjust your highlights, your midtones will move with you. However, you can move your midtones on your own without them affecting anything. There are no good or bad histograms. They are just a visual representation of the shadows and highlights in your image. Now, one thing this histogram does tell me is whenever you see something spike like this, this tells me that there is an area of my image that the whites are so far gone that I am never, ever going to get any detail out of them, no matter how much I adjust them. And if I look at my image, I can see that it's this sidewalk area down here. Sometimes that does not matter, but it's just something to be aware of. If you're ever, if my highlights had ended about here, I might have been able to coax a little more detail out of my shadows, but this, I'm never going to get anything. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adjust this, and I'm going to move my shadows over just a little. And now I'm going to move this over just a little. And yeah, that's going to blow out, but I want to lighten this up some. And I am done. I am at where I should be when I think I'm done. When you're happy with your image, there are no magic numbers. There are no, just click a button and have it be perfect. You have to look at it and decide when you're happy with it, and then you're done and you can click OK. So here's the deal. I just made some major adjustments to my image. I made them on the background image. And what I have and the minute I save this image, I have just made destructive edits to my image. By destructive, I mean I have changed the original pixel data permanently. And there is no going back. This is how my image is going to look from now on. And sometimes that's okay. If it was a crummy image and now it looks better and you are not ever going to change this image again, sometimes it's okay to make those edits on a background layer. But if there is ever a time when you think you may need to change that image, whether it's your preference, a client preference, where you want the flexibility of being able to undo that image, then you can't do it from the image adjustments. You need to do it with an adjustment layer. So I'm going to undo that, get back to my original. And over here on my layers panel, just because it's a good practice to get into a workflow usage, is I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer by choosing Command J or Control J. And I'm going to go down to the adjustment layer icons. And because it looks just like my image adjustments, I'm going to choose levels. And when I do that, I get the same histogram that I got over here under image adjustments. It behaves identically. The biggest change is that now I have editability later on. So I know when I bring this white slider over, I'm really going to blow out this part of the image. And this part of the image is going to get lighter, as is this. But I'd really like to see Kitty a little lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move over my white sliders a bit. And now here's where the real magic comes when you're using adjustment layers. So let's look at this adjustment layer for a moment. This item on the left is the histogram, the adjustment layer icon. And when I have this icon selected, notice there's a little frame around it. So that means when this is selected, I can work on my histogram, on my shadows, my highlights. I can touch up my contrast or my midtones if I want to. But what if I would like to darken up these highlights here, and maybe some of these over here that are kind of noisy? This is a layer mask. When you go to a layer mask, layer masks are black and they are white. Black conceals, white reveals. That's what everybody in the industry says. But basically, black will cover up everything and white is like an eraser. It erases it in a mask. That only works in a mask. So you have to use a brush in a mask. So I'm going to go over to my tool panel. I'm going to choose my brush. You can also select the letter B. And depending on what you're doing will depend on the kind of brush you select. If I go up here on my options panel, I'm going to go to my brush settings. And for this one, I'm going to choose a soft round brush. And because, bring that back. My hardness is at 0, but I want a bigger brush. 8 pixels isn't going to be enough. So I'm going to move it up to about 88 to 100 pixels. I don't know if you can see, maybe here you can see, there's the circle with my brush size in it. By the way, if your bracket keys can make your brush size larger or smaller, if you look down at your keyboard next to the letter P, the right bracket key will make your brush bigger, the left bracket key will make it smaller. I use these all the time. Now you want to make sure that the mask has a little double line around it, so you're drawing in the mask. And you want to make sure that over on your toolbar at the very bottom where you have your foreground and your background colors, you want to make sure that your foreground color is black. Once you have that black, then you can start painting over the area where you want to hide the effects of your levels panel. So when I draw in here, you can see how it shows up in my mask. And you can see how it goes over and darkens up that area because I've taken that little lightening away. Now, nothing's going to help this. I'm going to have to add a different layer mask for that. But I can see where the mask is applied to my image. And that was just with the one layer, with the one adjustment layer. Now, when I want to save this file, if I think I am going to have to go back to this file and edit it, I have to save it as a PSD or a TIFF. If I am done with this file and I don't think I'm ever going to have to change it again, I can do File, Save As, and I can choose to save it as a JPEG file. Now, when I do that, I'm not going to do that now, but when I do that, it is going to flatten the file and these edits will no longer be available to me. So sometimes you want to flatten them, sometimes not. It's going to depend on what your usage is going to be. Any questions before we move on? Okay.
Deb, you have a real simple question.
Sure.
Say if we like what we are doing now, we want export or transfer back to Lightroom. Should we do save or do save as?
Okay, good question. If you have come from Lightroom into Photoshop, when you press save, it will go back to Lightroom. You won't have to worry about it. If you are editing outside of Lightroom and you want this image to go back to Lightroom or go into Lightroom, you have to do that over here on the right-hand side. You have this share icon. And see where it says add to Lightroom photos? Then it will add it to Lightroom from there. But that's only when you're editing outside of Lightroom. Or maybe, yeah, or maybe you're editing phone photos and you want those to go into Lightroom. You can edit them here and then add them to Lightroom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So similar question, if we export the picture from Lightroom to Photoshop, we still should make a duplicate layer, right?
Well, when you're in Lightroom and you go to Photos and you say Edit in Photoshop, what's going to happen is you're going to edit in Photoshop and then you do File, Save. And when you do File, Save, it automatically goes back to Lightroom as a PSD file. It will, because it can't save back to the original file. It can't save to the raw file. So it will go back as a PSD file.
Yes, I understand that. Just go back to 2 steps. When earlier you mentioned this picture is come from a JPEG, so it's a flat file. That's
Right.
why we need to do duplicate layer so we don't damage the original file. But if the file came from Lightroom, is that still good practice? We always make a duplicate file layer before we do the editing?
Generally, yes. Making a duplicate layer, generally. And I say that, yeah, it's typical Photoshop. It depends. Sometimes it's it's generally a good idea to make an extra layer. Sometimes that doesn't fit the workflow. So you're going to have to decide then. I used to make a lot of duplicates of my files before I worked on them. I don't anymore, just because if I have raw files, but if they're JPEG files, then yeah, either make a duplicate or save it as a different, save it as a PSD, save it as a TIFF, especially if that image is important to you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Got it.
Sure. Okay.
Hey, Deb, this is Carl. I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
You're going from Photoshop back into Lightroom. It's going back as a PSD. Does it flatten it or does it maintain all of its layers?
It maintains its layers.
Great, thanks. I don't know whether that's true for Capture One or not, but
I don't either.
yeah, I'll have to try that. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another image. This is called Bouquet. Now this is fun. Once you see this, you'll recall all the places you've seen it, especially in the wedding magazines. So here we have, again, this is JPEG file, so it's a flat file. I'm going to, on this one, I'm not going to duplicate the layer just because I don't need to for what I'm doing. What I do want to do is I want to go down here to the bottom, to the adjustment layers, and I want to add a black and white adjustment layer. Now, the icon on the left is the black and white. Now, this is similar to Lightroom. These colors map to the colors that are in this image. So if you want to change this image at all, you can brighten up that orange, maybe brighten up that green, and it is non-destructive. So you have it, you can, like I said, these colors map to this. But here's what I want to do. I want to go over into the mask. I want to get my brush. Again, I want to use black because I'm going to color this in. I'm going to start with a soft brush, but when I get to the edges, I'm going to have to move to a hard-edged brush, and I'll show you why. So I have my mask selected, and I'm just going to start coloring in over the images that I want to be in color. And the bracket keys will make your brushes very small if you need them to be, and I can go in and just. Now, if I were doing this in real time, I have to tell you, I would be using a hard brush, and I would be so zoomed in on this that I would be able to see when I was getting to the edge. Especially if you're doing a wedding album, that can be a little bigger, or you're doing, you know, wedding pictures, wedding invitations, something like that. If you hold down your space bar, it turns into a hand. Your cursor turns into a hand, and you can move the image around in the. So that's really quick and really dirty. The one thing I want to point out to you, though, is with the mask. So I've been using a soft brush, and I've been using black, and I can see that I've really gone. Well, here I missed some area altogether, but when I go around the edges, see how I've spilled over. I want to change my brush color to white. So I can either click on this little switch here, or if you press the X key, it will switch these two colors. So white becomes my foreground color. And now I can start painting over that spillage and getting rid of it. This is when I would switch to a hard brush so that I don't have real soft edges around the outside here. And this would take forever, but it's when it's your darling daughter's wedding album, you spend the time. And this is a great little effect with just one adjustment layer. I've seen this done several different ways where you've made a frame, where people have made a frame and had everything outside the frame be black and white and the insides be color. But you can have a lot of fun with this, and very simple. One adjustment layer. There's before, there's after. It's just real quick and easy. Okay. All right. Now this one's a lot more fun. So this is the one thing you're never supposed to do, and that's show people your bad images, but you know, things happen. So what I want to do with this image is I want to lighten up this area, and I want to give this area some drama. And we're going to do all that with nothing more than adjustment layers. So first of all, I'm going to close that because anytime you're going to do something like this, you want to do that border patrol. You want to go through and get rid of things that are going to cause you problems like that. So I'm going to go get my patch tool. And I'm just going to patch around this. And I should point out, with my patch tool, I want to be sure and use content aware so that I don't have to figure out where those pixels need to come from. And then I want to do some of these over here. Get rid of this. And I'm not too fussy about this because it's pretty tiny. People aren't really going to see it. There we go. And yes, I did do this on a background layer rather than a separate layer because those things are gone and I want them gone forever. I am not concerned about them coming back or ever needing to come back. So, so yeah, I did do it on a background layer. In a perfect world, you could do that on a separate layer, but we didn't. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to select this area. And I'm going to go get a selection tool. I'm going to use my quick selection tool because this is so dark. I think it will select it very quickly. And I'm just going to drag over it a little. There we go. So now that I have this selection in place, I want to go over to my adjustment layer icon. And note, and this is what I want you to notice too. I have a selection already in place before I'm choosing an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go to the levels adjustment, exposure. And I get my exposure dialog box. And I'm going to bring that exposure up a little bit. Ooh. Play with my gamma. And okay. All right, that's a good start. Now I want to select the sky, and an easy way to do that is first I'm going to select this item again. I already have a mask in place. So if I hold down my Command or my Control button and I click on that mask, it makes the selection that I had before for the mask. But what I want is the sky. So let's go up to the menu on top and say Select Inverse. Now I have a sky selection. So I'm going to go back to my Layers panel. I'm going to go to my Adjustment Layer icon, and I'm going to choose Brightness and Contrast. And now I'm going to adjust my and actually, yeah, I'm going to leave it that way. Now I want you to notice these masks for because this is just the same as the building. This one is just the same as the sky. Occasionally, we like to see those masks up close. If you hold down your Option key or your Alt key and you click on that mask or icon, it will show you how the mask really looks. Sometimes you may want to check along an edge, or you want to make sure that this entire area is entirely filled. So this is just a toggle. If you hold your Alt or your Option key again, and you click on that mask, it takes it back. Now, here's something else I would like to do. I think this, I would like to change this to black and white. So I'm going to add one more adjustment layer, and I don't need a selection for this because I want it to kind of be the whole thing. And I'm going to go to my adjustment layer icon, and I'm going to choose black and white. And if I wanted to adjust some of this again, I could, it will map to that. So let's see what happens if I bring my blues down. Ooh, now I can get some drama going on. And then last but not least, I'd like to bring this part back as color. So I'm going to go to my mask on my black and white layer. I'm going to go get my brush. I'm going to go up to my brush size. This time I'm going to choose a hard round brush. I am going to make it a little bit bigger. And now I'm just going to go over this area. Whoop. Now, see how it's not working? It's because my foreground color is white. In a mask, white always erases. So I need to change that to black. I pressed my X key to switch my foreground and background color. Now my foreground color is black. And much better, much better. Make my brush a little bigger still. And this is where this harder brush comes into play. Where that plus is, if I don't get too close, I can see it's already bled in. Hopefully I won't have to go back over that edge. There we go. And I think I've said this before, whenever I'm doing this, it's really, I spend way more time. This is really quick and dirty. The only other thing I might do is I would like to darken this wall because I think it's just kind of, it's too garish. So if I go over here, now you can also, while my color is set to black, if I want to just color this in without it being black, I can just reduce the opacity of my brush a little bit and start drawing this in. And as I go over it time after time, it will get darker, even though I'm drawing with a low opacity. So I think you get the gist of it, although this is not working out quite like I thought it would. Much better. And the cool thing about this is you can actually see what's really going on in your mask if you need to. Remember to hold down your Alt Option or your Alt key when you click on the mask, and then whoop, that's not what I wanted. You can actually kind of see what's going on there. And that was done completely with adjustment layers. I never want, outside of getting rid of the crud in the edges, I use just adjustment layers for this. I'm going to select all three of these and I'm going to group them together. And now you can see before and after. Now, to save this file, if I want to go back and edit it at some later date, I need to save this as a PSD or as a TIFF file. But if I'm ready to let it go as it is, then I can save it as a JPEG file and send it off to the photo lab. Okay, any questions? All right. All right, now I have more exercises than we are going to have time for. So if you have any burning questions, now would be the time. Come on. So I'm going to do these. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to make this island bigger. So, and I'm purposely not making a copy of this image, of this layer right now. I'm going to work above the background layer. When you're working with layers, think of them like a cake. You know, you have on the bottom layer, you have the first layer, and then you have a layer of icing, and then maybe a layer of fruit, and then another cake layer. You're building a file, so it's one layer on top of another, and sometimes it makes a difference what order they're in, depending on what you're doing. So first thing I want to do with this is I want to make my island bigger. So I'm going to go get my lasso tool, and I'm going to make a loose selection here around the edge of this island. I'm just going to try to follow the edge. Now, when you do this, you want to look out for repeating patterns. I'm going to go ahead and do Control or Command J to duplicate that part of the layer. And then I'm going to go and get my Move tool, and I'm going to drag my layer over. What I want to watch for is I want to keep my horizon straight. See how I've created a repeating pattern with this and with this? So I'm going to back this up, and you can also use your arrow keys. They will work when you have your Move tool selected. Your arrow keys will also work. So now I have the left side of my islands a little bigger. Now I want to do the right side. So I have to go back and select my background layer, and I'm going to go around, go get my lasso tool and go around this edge of the island. I'm going to try not to get the top of that big tree. I do want to get those islands in the background. And now I'm going to do Command or Control J to duplicate just my selection. Anytime you create a selection and duplicate it, it will only duplicate that area that you have selected, which was just what I wanted. So here I have layer 2, and I'm going to move this over. And you kind of have to figure out where you're going to put it. Ooh, that looks pretty good. Now, I don't need these on separate layers anymore. Sometimes you need separate layers so you have editability going forward. I don't need these to be editable later. I needed a bigger island, so I'm going to merge down. Control or Command E will merge the top layer down to the next one. I'm going to do that again so that now I just have one longer island. So now I want to open up this image. Actually, I want to open up 2 images. I want to open up the dog and the television. Now, notice this is a flat file, and I want to get rid of the background. So to make this layer an editable layer, all you have to do is click on that lock, and now it is a regular layer. And as soon as you click on that lock, you get this quick action right here that says Remove Background. So let's go ahead and click that. And that was almost great. here's what Photoshop did. Photoshop uses content aware to figure out what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. And it does not do it destructively. It creates a mask for you. When it does that, it links the mask to the item. So this white area in the back really isn't deleted. It is just hidden, which means I can go back and I can fix this portion right here where my mask, where Photoshop got overzealous. I can click on the mask, go and get my brush. Now, black conceals, white reveals. I want to reveal the part that Photoshop took away. That is a really big brush, so I'm going to make my brush a lot smaller. I'm going to change my foreground color to white, and then I'm just going to draw this back in. Oh, I need to increase my opacity. Just kind of bring that back. Okay. Now, because, oh, here's one more thing I want to do. I want to make a selection of the inside of this television. So I need to click on the thumbnail icon, not on the mask, because I want the inside. And I'm going to go and get my quick selection tool. Actually, I'm going to use my magic wand tool. And the magic wand tool goes from, I believe it goes up to 50 for tolerance. And I want to check contiguous because I want the pixels to all be touching. And I'm going to try to make a selection with this with a tolerance of 20. So I'm going to click once inside. If I hold my shift key down, I can click over here, see if I can add to it. And that's not bad. Okay, so now I have this selection inside. I want to go over here and I want to get the island dog. And all I want to do is I want to copy this file and I want to put it inside my television. So it's a flat file. So the best way to do this is to select all. So you go to select and choose all. You get marching ants around the edges. Let's do edit, copy. Let's go back to our television island. And here's the special part. We're going to do edit, paste special, paste into my selection. And when we do that, it automatically creates a mask around the image. Unlike the layer below it, where these are linked together, these are not linked together because we don't want the outside of our television to move, to be revealed no matter what. We might want to move the dog, but we don't want our TV to move. So these are not linked together. But here's what I want to do is I want to take the dog image and I want to transform it. So I'm going to click on the icon for the dog and I'm going to go to edit, free transform, and I will get my bounding box. Now, if you go to the corner, you will get a double-headed corner arrow and you can rotate your image. The only thing about rotation is you're going to lose some of your corners. So while that's okay to stretch it, be aware that you are going to lose some resolution, but it won't matter this time. So now I have my dog fitting in there. And I have to commit my transformation by either clicking on the check mark or pressing return. And now I have my dog in the television. Now here's the thing. I would like to take this file, but I want to put it over here in my island image, but I don't want to get rid of my layers because the client might want a different TV. They might want a different dog. So now is the time to create a smart object. So I want to select both of my layers. I have this one selected, hold down my Shift key, select my second layer. And then I want to go over here to my Hamburger menu on the Layers panel, and I can go down to Convert Smart Object. And now I have my smart object all together, or my layers all together in my smart object. All right. Now, here's the thing. If I copy and paste this into my island image, it will not maintain it as a smart object. So to maintain it as a smart object, I'm going to do it this way. Let's go up to Window. Let's say Arrange, and let's say Tile All Vertically. Now I can go over to my layer. Let me go get my Move tool. I can take this layer and I can drag it right into this image. You need to drag it into the body of the image. You will also get a little black line up here around the image, and when you let go, it will pop right in. I'm going to close this, not going to save. And you can see it's a smart object still. It's got the smart object icon. So, all right, so I'm going to go get my Move tool. I'm going to move my smart object here. I need to transform it a little bit. So I'm going to use Command or Control T for transform. And I want to tilt it. Yeah. If you put your cursor in the center of an object, you can move it around. And now I'm ready for that commitment. All right, the last thing I want to do is I want to put this in the water. So I'm going to go and get my Lasso tool. I'm going to click on my background layer, and I'm going to kind of follow the waves around so that they look okay. Now, because I was practicing with this earlier, one thing I forgot to mention is here's my Lasso tool. I have this at a 6-pixel feather. That's so that this edge will be feathered a little bit, and when I copy and paste it to a new layer, it'll blend in better. So I'm on my background layer, and I'm just going to do Command or Control J. Now I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to put it above my dog and my TV. And now while I'm on layer 2, I'm going to reduce the opacity so I can see through the water a little bit. And now I've used a smart object, I've used the opacity, and I've got 3 layers for my document. To save this, I need to save it as a PSD or a TIFF, and then that will give me access to these layers. It'll also give me access to my smart object, and I can edit it as long as I want. Okay, we are closing on 4 o'clock. What do you guys want to do? I have one more, or you can just do it and call me with your questions.
Go ahead and do it.
Go ahead and do it.
Yep.
Okay, it's not too long. Any questions about this before I close it? Okay.
I have one question.
Okay.
As you're generating each piece of this and you're cutting things in and out and you're creating pieces, does Photoshop automatically create layers for all of that every time I notice it's doing that.
Yes, it does. Anytime you paste into Photoshop, it will create a layer. When you click on the text tool, it will create a new layer. It will, anytime you're bringing stuff in, it generally creates a new layer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. This one's very fun. So here we have champagne and the couple. All right, so what I want to do is I want to cut this couple out. So I'm going to use the object selection tool because it works really well. Mine is set on rectangle. I only have the 1 layer. So I'm just going to drag a rectangle around them. And actually it did pretty good. It missed the back of his head a little bit right in there, but it seemed to do pretty well here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Select and Mask. And just let Select and Mask clean this up a little bit. Now, Select and Mask, what I'm going to use is the Refine Edge brush, and I'm just going to go around the edges here. Select and Mask is an extremely extremely intensive, memory intensive tool. And I can see right now it's not doing very well. There we go. And occasionally this will not work properly. When it does not work properly, you might have to reset your preferences. That used to be a thing with Photoshop all the time. We were always having to reset our preferences. Recently it's gotten better, but this one in particular, a couple of people have had trouble with it. So if you are having trouble with it, try resetting your preferences, see if that will resolve it. Now, this should work a little better than this. I'm going back to, we always go back to what we know, right? I can fix some of this faster right now than Photoshop can. Okay, that's going to be good enough. Now, I can do one of two things. I could have Photoshop do this for me, or once I have my selection in place, I'm just going to do Control or Command J. And what that does is that puts my bride and groom on their own layer. What I really want is I want this in my Champagne document. So I'm going to hold down my Command key or Control key. I am going to click on that thumbnail and I have my selection. I'm going to do Edit, Copy, move back to my Champagne document and do Edit, Paste, and it drops them right in. Now, obviously, if you're doing this in real time, you're going to do a much better selection around her hair. There, I see some hair in here, something a little here. So you'll do a better selection. So now what I want to do is I want to take them and put them in the glass. So I'm going to choose Free Transform, Edit, Free Transform, and I'm going to make them smaller. Actually, I want them to be right about there. And here, obviously, her dress extends outside the inside of the glass here. He's a little tall too, so I'm going to bring them down. Now you could create a mask to hide this portion of her dress, but I know right now I don't want that portion of the dress back, so I'm just going to go get an eraser. I'm going to use a soft eraser, soft round brush, and I'm just going to be sure I select the correct layer, and then I'm just going to erase that area. And I'm going to go around the bottom here just a little bit so that that's kind of a soft look too. Okay. Now here's one of the fun parts. Up here where we have our blending mode, I'm on layer 1, and I'm going to change this blending mode to lighten. And that gives me all those bubbles in there. Now I want to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to do Control J. Whoop. And on this one, I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to change. No, I'm not. I'm going to zoom in over here so I can get to their faces. Go and get your brush. Make sure your foreground color is black, that your mask is selected. And now I'm going to start erasing the bubbles off her face. Oh, I need to change this to normal. You know what? Wait a minute. I'm doing something wrong. So I have lighten, duplicate this layer, change the blending mode to normal. Oh, sorry. This needs to be filled with black. When you select your mask, I'm going to hold down my Command key, click on my Delete key to fill it with mask, black. Now I'm going to erase it off their faces. There we go. So now we've got them in there. We've got the bubbles around them. We're going to add a little text to it. Now, when you choose text, when you're adding text to Photoshop, you click on your letter T, and in a perfect world, we select our attributes first. So I'm going to go up here to the type, and I'm going to find something very scripty. We'll use Papyrus. And when you click with, sorry, my toolbars are in the way. When you click once with your type tool, Photoshop now puts up this Greek type so that you can see where the type should go. I can see that my type's a little large, so I'm going to reduce it. And now you add in your type. Okay, for this, whenever you choose a type tool, it will automatically create the layer for you. And we have 4 layers here, so we can go back and change the type at any time. Or if you decide that there needs to be more or less bubbles, you have these 2 layers to go back to. And that's that one for today.